The era of men like me has passed, men defined by silent sacrifice and loyalty. Now the world belongs to the noisy and the machines. Until the Alpha Pack discovered that wisdom remains the most powerful weapon. Snow fell gently outside Victor Morgan's cabin window. At 76, his hands bore the weather geography of a life spent outdoors, a stark contrast to the smooth screens and polished surfaces that dominated the modern world. He watched the flakes accumulate on the wooden railing of his porch, remembering winters long past, when the small town of Silverstone still bustled with purpose. Victor adjusted the worn flannel shirt that hung loosely on his frame. The mirror above his fireplace reflected what the world saw: an old man with steel gray hair cropped short in the same military style he'd worn since Korea, deep creases mapping his face and eyes still sharp despite the years. What the mirror couldn't show was the hollow feeling that had settled in his chest 5 years ago, when Sarah passed, leaving him alone in a world that seemed to have no place for men like him. The television droned in the background, another report about technological advancements making traditional skills obsolete. Victor scoffed, reaching for his coffee mug. They hadn't invented a machine yet that could read the forest like he could, that understood the language of tracks in fresh snow or the shifting winds before a storm. Outside his window, Silverstone was dying. What had once been a thriving logging community nestled in the Montana wilderness now resembled a museum to a forgotten way of life. The young had left for cities and technology parks, leaving behind empty storefronts and aging residents. The local diner where he'd taken breakfast for 30 years had closed last spring. The hardware store, where men once gathered to share hunting stories, now housed a souvenir shop catering to the occasional tourist. Victor rose from his chair, wincing at the stiffness in his right knee, an old war injury that forecasted weather better than any meteorologist. He moved to the back room where maps of the surrounding forest lined the walls. His fingers traced the familiar contours of Thunder Mountain and the winding path of Eagle Creek. These maps held more than geographical information. They contained the secret he'd kept for 50 years. The phone rang, disrupting his thoughts. Probably Jack, his son, calling for their monthly check-in from Chicago. Their conversations had grown increasingly stilted over the years, bridging not just physical distance, but the vast gap between their worlds. Jack lived in the future: artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and electric everything. Victor remained tethered to a past that seemed more distant with each passing year. He answered with his customary gruffness. "Morgan here." "Dad, it's me." Jack's voice sounded strained. "How are you holding up with the storm coming?" "Same as the last 50 storms. Got wood stacked, generator checked, and enough coffee to last till spring." The ensuing silence spoke volumes. Victor could almost hear his son's unspoken concern. Perhaps it was time for assisted living, for a place with proper medical care and people to check on him. They'd had this conversation before, and Victor had shut it down each time. "I saw on the news that some big development company is eyeing property near Silverstone," Jack finally said. "Nexus Corporation, they're planning some luxury resort." Victor's grip tightened on the receiver. "They can plan all they want. Nobody's selling." "Dad, it might be good for the town. Bring in jobs, revitalize." "They don't understand these mountains." Victor interrupted, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They think they're buying real estate, but there are things in these forests that don't appear on any survey." "Dad," Jack's tone held that familiar mixture of concern and exasperation. "I know what you're thinking. Just another crazy old-timer with his superstitions. But you remember what your grandfather used to say about Thunder Mountain? That it had a heartbeat," Jack conceded. "But those are just stories." Victor glanced again at his maps. "Some stories have teeth, son." After they hung up, Victor moved to the large oak chest in his bedroom. The lock turned with a familiar click, revealing his most precious possessions: Sarah's wedding ring, his service medals, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloth, an ornate silver pendant. The wolf's head engraved on it seemed to catch non-existent light, the ruby eyes gleaming with an inner fire that defied explanation. "They think we're just old men, waiting to die," he murmured to the empty room. "But they don't know we're the last ones who understand that these forests harbor dangerous secrets." The storm hit Silverstone with unexpected ferocity. Wind howled through the pines, bending ancient trunks and flinging snow against Victor's windows, like spectral fingers seeking entry. He added another log to the fire, settled into his armchair. with a dog-eared copy of Jack London's White Fang, and tried to ignore the strange restlessness that had plagued him all day. Something was coming. He felt it in his bones, the same sixth sense that had kept him alive in the frozen hills of Korea when younger men fell to ambushes and hidden dangers. Just past midnight, his instincts proved correct. The sound barely registered above the storm's wail, a single sharp rap against his front door. Victor set down his book, reaching automatically for the shotgun mounted above the fireplace. Few people ventured out in weather like this, and fewer still would come to his isolated cabin after dark. He approached the door cautiously, weapon ready, but not raised. When he pulled it open, the wind nearly tore it from his grip. For a moment, he saw nothing through the swirling snow. Then his eyes found her. She was slumped against his porch railing, one arm clutching her side where dark blood stained her torn jacket. Mid-30s perhaps, with striking features partially obscured by tangled dark hair, plastered to her face by snow and sweat. Her eyes found his remarkable eyes, deep amber, that seemed to catch the porch light in an almost reflective way. "Help," she managed, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Please." Victor hesitated only a moment before setting aside his shotgun and moving to support her. As his arm went around her waist, he felt her flinch away from his touch, instinctively protective of her injured side. "Easy now," he said, guiding her inside. "Whatever's after you won't find you here tonight." The woman's head snapped up, her gaze suddenly sharp despite her weakened state. "What makes you think something's after me?" Victor closed and locked the door before answering. "Nobody runs through a blizzard at midnight unless the alternative is worse." He helped her to his couch, noticing how she scanned the room exit's windows, potential weapons with practiced precision. Not a lost hiker or a tourist who'd wandered off course. This woman was trained alert despite her injury. "I need to look at that wound," Victor said, retrieving his first aid kit from the kitchen. She hesitated, then nodded carefully, removing her jacket to reveal a deep laceration along her ribs. But what caught Victor's attention wasn't the severity of the wound, it was its nature. The edges were ragged in a distinct pattern, not from a knife or bullet, but from teeth. Large teeth. "That's a bite," he said quietly. Her eyes met his, wary and calculating. "You seem remarkably calm about that." Victor's weathered face revealed nothing as he cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency. "Seen worse in Alaska. Summer of '69, working pipeline security. Something took one of our guys. Left marks like these." "What was it?" she asked, watching his hands work. Official reports said wolf, biggest damn wolf anyone had ever seen. He applied antiseptic, noting how she barely winced despite what must have been considerable pain. "But I've tracked wolf packs from Canada to Colorado. Never saw one that left a bite pattern like this." As he wrapped her torso with clean bandages, his fingers brushed against a chain around her neck. Her hand moved with surprising speed, closing protectively over whatever pendant hung from it. "I'm Elena," she offered, clearly changing the subject. "Victor Morgan." "Thank you for taking me in, Mr. Morgan." "Victor," he corrected. "And you're welcome to stay until the storm passes. But then I expect some honest answers about what left that bite and why it's hunting you." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What makes you so sure I know?" "Because," Victor said, packing away his first aid supplies, "you're not surprised by it. Scared, yes, but not surprised." Before she could respond, Victor noticed something unusual. The edges of her wound, which had been raw and angry moments ago when he cleaned it, had already begun to show signs of healing, accelerated beyond any normal human recovery. And as she shifted position, the light caught her eyes at a certain angle, turning the amber to a luminous gold for the briefest moment. Victor maintained his composure, decades of military discipline, keeping his expression neutral. But his mind raced with memories of another place, another time, a remote village in Alaska where he'd witnessed things that defied conventional explanation. "You should rest," he said, retrieving a blanket from a nearby chair. "Whatever's out there won't be moving in this weather either." Elena accepted the blanket gratefully. "I've forgotten what safety feels like." As she drifted into an exhausted sleep, Victor moved to the window, watching the swirling snow illuminate briefly by moonlight, breaking through the clouds. The storm wouldn't last forever, and when it cleared, he suspected Silverstone would face something far more dangerous than a corporate takeover. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where beneath his shirt lay an old scar, 3 parallel lines that had never properly healed. Some secrets ran deeper than blood, and some bonds transcended time. Whatever had followed Elena to his door had unwittingly awakened something dormant for half a century. The wolf pendant in his oak chest seemed to call to him from across the room, a silent reminder of a debt unpaid and a promise made long ago. Morning brought clarity to the mountains, the storm having exhausted itself sometime before dawn. Victor moved quietly through the cabin, preparing coffee and checking Elena's condition as she slept. The wound looked days rather than hours old, confirmation of his suspicions. He stoked the fire and settled into his chair, watching his unexpected guest. There was something familiar about her features, something that tugged at memories long buried. As the coffee percolated, filling the cabin with its rich aroma, Victor allowed his mind to drift back 50 years or to the frozen wilderness of Alaska. He had been 26 then, fresh from Korea and unable to settle into civilian life. The pipeline security to buy had seemed perfect, remote, dangerous, requiring the skills he'd honed in war. His team had been investigating reports of sabotage at a remote section when a blizzard separated Victor from the others. 3 days he wandered, hypothermia setting in, before stumbling upon a village unmarked on any map. The villagers had taken him in people with remarkably similar features to Elena. Their eyes held the same amber warmth that occasionally flashed gold. They spoke English with a peculiar cadence, as if it were their second or third language. And they possessed knowledge of healing that defied modern medicine. An elder named Solomon had treated Victor's frostbite with poultices that restored circulation to blackened fingers overnight. When Victor expressed amazement, Solomon had simply smiled. There are things older than the wars of men powers that existed before we named them. Elena stirred on the couch, drawing Victor back to the present. Her eyes opened, immediately alert. "The storm has passed," he said, pouring a cup of coffee and bringing it to her. She accepted it gratefully, inhaling the steam. "I should go. My being here puts you in danger. Seems to me you're in no condition to go anywhere." Victor nodded toward her side. "Though you're healing remarkably fast." Elena tensed her fingers, tightening around the mug. "What do you know about my condition?" Instead of answering, Victor retrieved a small photo album from his bookshelf. He opened it to a faded photograph himself as a young man standing beside an elderly native Alaskan with striking amber eyes. "Solomon," he explained, passing her the album. "He saved my life in 1969 when I should have died in the snow." Elena's breath caught as she studied the image, her free hand unconsciously moving to the chain around her neck. She hesitated, then slowly withdrew the pendant that hung from it, a silver wolf's head, identical to the one in Victor's oak chest. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I could ask you the same question." Victor's voice remained calm, but his pulse quickened. "That symbol belongs to a people I met only once in a village that wasn't on any map." Elena stared at him with new intensity. "The Ukarik," she said, using a word Victor hadn't heard in decades. "You've been among them. Briefly, long enough to learn they weren't entirely human." He held her gaze steadily. "Like you." The moment stretched between them, a precipice neither could retreat from. Finally, Elena nodded, a decision made. "I worked for Nexus Corporation," she began. "Genetic Research Division. We were studying evolutionary adaptations in isolated populations when we discovered something extraordinary in blood samples from Alaska." "The Ukarik," Victor supplied. "We didn't know their name then. Only that these samples contain genetic markers, unlike anything in recorded science markers, that allowed for accelerated healing, enhanced senses, and—" She hesitated. "Transformation," Victor finished for her. Elena's eyes widened. "You've seen it." "Once." Victor's voice grew distant. "During my last night in the village, there was an attack, rogue hunters who tracked a member of the tribe for days. Solomon changed to defend his people. Not fully animal, not fully man, something in between. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the 3 parallel scars. But all the hunters died cleanly. One got past Solomon, came at me with a knife. I survived, but Solomon was devastated that an outsider had seen their secret. He made me swear never to speak of what I'd witnessed." Elena set down her coffee, her expression grave. "Nexus discovered similar genetic markers in your old military blood samples. Victor, they've been tracking down everyone who served with you in Alaska." The implication hit Victor like a physical blow. They think we were all exposed. Not just exposed, changed. Elena rose gingerly from the couch, moving to the window. When Solomon saved you, he did more than heal your wounds. His blood, his DNA became part of yours. Victor sat very still, pieces falling into place across decades. The heightened senses that had served him so well in civilian life. His uncanny ability to navigate wilderness that left younger men lost. The way animals responded to his presence, wary but not frightened. Nexus isn't building a resort, Elena continued. They're constructing a research facility. They've spent years perfecting techniques to activate dormant genetic material to create controllable versions of what they call Alpha Wolves human weapons with enhanced abilities. And you were part of this. Victor couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Elena turned, her expression pained. Until I discovered they were experimenting on unwilling subjects. People kidnapped from across the country, chosen because they carried fragments of the same genetic markers. When I tried to stop it, they decided I'd make an excellent test subject myself. She pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. I managed to download their research before escaping. It contains evidence of 12 other test subjects who escaped during the chaos of my breakout. They're scattered across America, all being hunted. Victor processed this information with the methodical calm that had kept him alive in combat. In the bite, Reed, Elena spat the name. Head of Nexus Security. He was the first successful transformation, if you can call a man who's lost his humanity successful. He's hunting us all personally. A sound outside drew their attention, vehicles approaching on the rarely used road to Victor's cabin. He moved to the window with surprising agility for his age, peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 black SUVs, he reported. Government plates, but not government men. Elena paled. They found me faster than I expected. Victor moved with decisive efficiency, gathering essentials into a rucksack, food, first aid supplies, ammunition for his hunting rifle. He pulled on his heavy winter coat and retrieved the wolf pendant from his oak chest, slipping it around his neck. There's an old trapping cabin 8 miles north, he said, opening a concealed door that led to a root cellar and beyond it a tunnel. Mining shaft from the 1800s. Comes out near Beaver Creek. They won't track you through it. Elena stared at him. You're coming with me. I'll slow you down. They'll kill you for helping me. Victor checked his rifle with practiced hands. I'm 76 years old, Elena. My wife is gone. My son thinks I'm a relic, and the world has moved past men like me. But I still remember how to fight. A sharp knock came at the front door. Mr. Morgan, a deep voice called. Federal agents. We need to speak with you. Victor gave Elena a pointed look. That tunnel stays secret until it's needed. Now it's needed. Elena hesitated, then moved swiftly to his side. She clasped his weathered hand in hers. You're more important than you realize, Victor. If what I suspect is true, you might be the key to saving all of us. Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the tunnel. Victor sealed it behind her, straightened his posture, and moved to answer the door. Victor opened his front door to find a man in his 40s wearing an immaculate black suit despite the snow and rural setting. His posture screamed military training, but his smile held the practiced insincerity of a corporate executive. Mr. Morgan, I'm James Reed with Nexus Corporation. He extended a hand that Victor deliberately ignored. We're conducting a search for a fugitive who may have passed through this area during the storm. 2 more men flanked Reed, their stances revealing concealed weapons beneath their identical black coats. Victor noted their positioning, professional tactical, spreading out to cover angles of approach. Not corporate security, something more specialized. Haven't seen anyone, Victor replied, maintaining his position in the doorway. Storm was too bad for traveling. Reed's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Mind if we come in? Just a routine check. We're concerned about this individual. She's mentally unstable, possibly dangerous. Got a warrant? Victor asked mildly. A flicker of annoyance crossed Reed's features. This isn't a police matter, Mr. Morgan. We're a private company assisting federal authorities in locating a former employee who stole proprietary research. It's a matter of national security. Victor leaned against his door frame, the picture of rural indifference. Sounds complicated. Still gonna need to see some paperwork before you enter my home. Reed's facade cracked slightly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not understanding the gravity of the situation, old man. We know she was here. We can do this the easy way, or we can tear this cabin apart board by board. Victor met Reed's gaze without flinching. There was something wrong about the man's eyes. The pupils slightly elongated, the irises containing flecks of gold that appeared and vanished as he spoke. Victor had seen those eyes before in Alaska, but there was a crucial difference. In the Yukaric, those eyes held humanity alongside animal instinct. In Reed, Victor saw only predatory calculation. I fought in Korea, son, Victor said quietly. Been threatened by experts. You don't qualify. Reed's nostrils flared, inhaling deeply. Victor realized with a chill that the man was literally scenting the air, sorting through the cabin's smells like a bloodhound. She was here, Reed said with certainty. Recently. His head tilted, studying Victor with new interest. And there's something about you, something familiar. Victor remained impassive, though inwardly he cursed. Reed could smell Elena's presence, possibly even detect the subtle genetic similarity between Victor's altered DNA and her own. Before Reed could pursue this line of thought, the radio on his belt crackled to life. Sir, we've got tracks heading east from the back of the property. Fresh female moving fast. A predatory smile spread across Reed's face. It seems our conversation will have to wait, Mr. Morgan, but I'm very interested in continuing it soon. He leaned closer, inhaling again near Victor's neck. Very interested indeed. The trio departed with unsettling speed, their vehicles fishtailing on the snowy road as they raced toward the false trail Victor had prepared while Elena escaped north through the tunnel, an old hunter's trick creating misleading tracks to protect the quarry. Victor closed his door and moved immediately to the back room. He opened an ancient ham radio set and began turning dials with practiced precision. If Nexus was hunting people with Ukaric blood, then others from his old unit might already be targeted. He needed to warn them to assemble what resources he could. The radio crackled to life. This is Sierra Echo calling any November Echo survivors. Priority Echo. Repeat, this is Sierra Echo calling any November Echo survivors. For several minutes only static answered him. Then a gruff voice broke through. Victor Morgan, you old bastard. Nobody's used those call signs in 40 years. Relief flooded through him. Frank, thank God, we've got trouble. When don't we, what's going on? Victor quickly outlined the situation. Elena Nexus, the genetic experiments, Reed. Frank whistled low. Always knew that business in Alaska would come back to haunt us. How many of the old unit are still alive? Last reunion counted 7, but that was 3 years ago. I can reach Thomas Hayes up near the Canadian border. He kept closer contact with the others. Good. Tell them to go dark, avoid medical facilities, and watch for Nexus operatives. And Frank, they should know that Solomon's warning was real. The change is possible. A long pause followed. You've seen it. Not in us, not yet, but I've seen what Nexus created. It's the real deal, and it's as dangerous as Solomon said it would be without proper guidance. Jesus, Vic. After all these years, Frank's voice hardened with resolve. What's your play? Victor glanced at the map on his wall, mentally plotting routes through wilderness few people could navigate. I'm going to find Elena. Then we're going to locate the others who escaped from Nexus. There's a bigger game here than they realize. You're 76 years old, Victor. This isn't our fight anymore. Victor touched the wolf pendant at his chest. That's where you're wrong, old friend. I think it's always been our fight. We just didn't know it until now. After signing off, Victor packed more thoroughly wilderness survival gear, weapons, medications. Decades in these mountains had taught him every cave, every hidden valley, every game trail that could provide passage unseen by human eyes. Elena had a head start, but he knew where she was heading. The question was whether he could reach her before Reed picked up her trail again. As he prepared to leave, Victor's gaze fell on a photo of Sarah on their 40th anniversary, her eyes still sparkling despite the cancer that would claim her months later. One last mission, love, he murmured. Seems I've still got some purpose left after all. He slipped out the back door into the crystalline winter afternoon, an aged warrior returning to battle carrying the weight of secrets older than his years, and a determination that age had tempered rather than diminished. The world might have forgotten men like Victor. Morgan might have dismissed them as relics of a bygone era, But the wilderness remembered. And in the ancient forests surrounding Silverstone, old powers were stirring powers that recognized the wolf's blood that had flowed in his veins for half a century, waiting for the moment to awaken. Victor Morgan moved through the forest with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent his life reading wilderness signs. Despite his 76 years, his stride remained purposeful, his breathing measured even as he navigated the steep terrain. The winter sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the pristine snow as he approached the abandoned trapping cabin where Elena waited. He found her tending a small fire alert and ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Relief washed over her features when she recognized him. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she admitted, helping him shed his heavy pack. "Nexus took the bait," Victor replied, warming his hands by the flames. "Sent them 15 miles in the wrong direction, but Reed will figure it out soon enough. He's not entirely human anymore." Elena nodded grimly. "I noticed. The early test subjects retained their humanity, but Reed volunteered for an enhanced protocol. It made him stronger faster, but accelerated the psychological changes as well. The wolf ascendant, the man receding." Victor unpacked supplies methodically, his movements economical. "We need to move at first light. Head north to find Thomas Hayes, another veteran from Alaska. One of the few still alive. If anyone knows how to contact the others, it's Thomas. He became obsessed with the Yukaric after our encounter, spent decades researching wolf legends across cultures." As they prepared a sparse meal, Victor noticed Elena studying him with intense curiosity. "You move remarkably well for your age," she observed. "Is that part of it, the changes to your DNA?" Victor considered this as he stirred a pot of beans, heating over the fire. "Never thought much about it. Always figured I was just lucky good genes from my father's side. He lived to 92 sharp as a tack till the end." He paused, remembering. "But yes, I heal quicker than most. Rarely get sick. Can still track game that men half my age lose trail of. But no transformation. No shifts in appearance. Nothing like what I saw in Solomon. Nothing like Reed." Victor met her gaze steadily. "Solomon said it varied. Some carried the blood, but never manifested the more dramatic changes." Elena nodded. "Our research showed the same. The genetic markers exist on a spectrum. Some express minimally enhanced senses, longevity, accelerated healing. Others manifest the full transformation." "And where do you fall on this spectrum?" Victor asked quietly. She looked away into the flames. "Somewhere in the middle. Nexus was trying to force complete transformation in all subjects. They nearly succeeded with me." Victor didn't press further. The haunted look in her eyes told him enough about what she'd endured in Nexus laboratories. They set out before dawn, traveling north through dense forest that few modern Americans could navigate without GPS or trails. Victor led confidently, occasionally pointing out signs that would be invisible to untrained eyes: a bent twig indicating a deer had passed recently, the subtle impression of a snowshoe hare's passage, the distant cry of a hawk hunting the tree line. By midday, they reached a frozen lake that stretched toward distant mountains. Victor paused, scanning the tree line on the far shore. "We're not alone," he said softly. Elena tensed her nostrils, flaring slightly as she scented the air. "Not Reed, someone else." Victor gestured toward barely perceptible tracks along the shore. "Someone's following the same path. Someone who knows these woods." "Another of the escape test subjects," Elena suggested. "Possibly." Victor adjusted his course slightly. "We'll parallel their trail, see where it leads." As they traveled, Elena grew increasingly alert, occasionally tilting her head as if listening to sounds beyond human range. By late afternoon, she abruptly stopped. "I can sense them," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "It's like a resonance, the same blood calling to blood." Victor watched her curiously. Solomon mentioned something similar. He called it pack bonds, an instinctive connection between those who share the Yukaric heritage. "I've never felt it before," Elena murmured. "In the lab, we were kept isolated. This is different, like finding a piece of yourself you never knew was missing." They followed this invisible connection through increasingly difficult terrain until dusk approached. Victor called a halt at the base of a steep ravine, establishing a protected campsite with the practiced ease of a lifetime outdoorsman. As they sat beside another small fire, Elena broke the companionable silence. How did you adjust after Korea, after Alaska, coming back to a world that had moved on without you? Victor's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes reflected old pain. Poorly at first, the nightmares were the worst, seeing friends die over and over, making different choices that still ended in tragedy. PTSD, Elena said. We studied it extensively at Nexus. The Wolf Protocol was partially designed to help soldiers process trauma. Victor snorted. Turning them into supernatural predators seems an extreme therapy approach. The theory was sound even if the application became corrupted. The wolf exists in the moment, no regrets about the past, no anxiety about the future. Just the present, the pack, the hunt. Victor considered this. There's wisdom there. I found my peace in these mountains eventually. The wilderness doesn't care about your past. It only judges you on your ability to read its signs and respect its power. He stoked the fire, watching embers rise toward the star-filled sky. There's a reason our ancestors revered wolves. They embody family loyalty and survival values the modern world seems determined to forget. Elena studied him with newfound appreciation. Most people your age would be terrified by what's happening by what I am. Yet you seem almost comfortable with it. I've lived long enough to know that the world is far stranger than we admit, Victor replied. Science keeps pushing boundaries, thinking it's discovering something new, when often it's just rediscovering what indigenous people knew for millennia. A distant howl echoed through the mountains, not a wolf, but something approximating a wolf's call. Both Victor and Elena froze, listening intently. Read, Victor whispered. Elena shook her head. Different. Familiar but different. Victor extinguished the fire with a handful of snow. We move now. No more rest until we reach Thomas. They traveled through the night, Victor navigating by starlight and memory. Elena matched his pace effortlessly, her enhanced physiology allowing her to move through darkness that would blind normal humans. By dawn, they crested a ridge overlooking a narrow valley where a single cabin stood, smoke rising from its chimney. Thomas, Victor confirmed, scanning the area for signs of danger. Elena suddenly stiffened. We're not alone. From the trees behind them emerged a figure, a woman in her late 20s, moving with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Her eyes glowed faintly gold in the early morning light. You're like me, she said to Elena, her voice holding wonder and fear in equal measure. I felt you coming. How is that possible? Pack bonds, Elena explained gently. We're connected by the same blood, the same changes. The young woman looked desperately between them. I'm Maya. They did something to me at a clinic in Seattle. Said it was an experimental treatment for my autoimmune condition. Now I can't control what's happening to me. Victor approached her slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. We're heading to someone who might have answers, someone who's studied these changes for decades. Maya's eyes darted nervously between them, then toward the valley below. There are others looking for us, men with guns and something else. Something wrong about them. Nexus security teams, Elena confirmed grimly, likely working with Reed. Victor made a swift decision. No more delays. We head directly to Thomas. They descended toward the cabin, Maya joining their small party with the desperate hope of someone who had found the first real answers since her life imploded. The cabin looked deceptively ordinary. Weathered logs darkened by decades of Montana winters, a metal roof weighted with stones against high winds, smoke curling from a river rock chimney. But Victor noted the subtle security measures, strategically placed mirrors reflecting approaches from all directions, carefully positioned. Wind chimes that would alert to movement even in dead calm, and the unmistakable glint of surveillance cameras disguised as birdhouses. Thomas Hayes had become paranoid in his later years, it seemed, perhaps with good reason. Victor approached openly, hands visible. Thomas, it's Victor Morgan. The cabin door remained firmly shut, but a speaker hidden under the eaves crackled to life. Prove it, Victor sighed. Anchorage, 1969. You puked on Captain Arison's boots after drinking that homemade hooch from the supply sergeant. Told him it was food poisoning, but we all knew better. A moment's silence, then a series of metallic clicks as multiple locks disengaged. The door swung open to reveal a tall, gaunt man with a shock of white hair and a full beard. Despite his 78 years, Thomas Hayes stood straight-backed, his blue eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. A hunting rifle rested casually in his hands. Victor Morgan, he said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes. Didn't expect to see you again this side of the grave. His gaze shifted to Elena and Maya, narrowing with immediate recognition of what they were. And you've brought company. Interesting company. We need to talk, Victor said. About Alaska, about Solomon. Thomas's expression hardened. Been a long time since I heard that name spoken aloud. He stepped back, gesturing them inside with his rifle barrel. Better come in then. Weather report says a storm's brewing. Metaphorically speaking. The cabin's interior revealed Thomas's obsession. Walls covered with maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected with red string in an elaborate web. Books filled every available space, their spines showing titles about wolf mythology, genetic anomalies, indigenous cultures, and cryptozoology. You've been busy, Victor observed, taking in the decades of research. Thomas secured the door behind them. Someone had to document it. The rest of you were too busy pretending Alaska never happened. His attention turned fully to Elena and Maya, studying them with the analytical eye of a scientist rather than the fear most would show. How far along are you in the transition? Maya looked confused, but Elena answered directly. I can partially shift. Enhanced senses, strength, healing. No full transformation yet. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. And the girl, earlier stages, less control. And who did this to you? Thomas asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Nexus Corporation, Elena confirmed. They found genetic markers in blood samples from Alaska, started experimenting, created their own version of the change. Thomas cursed softly. I warned the Pentagon 20 years ago that someone would eventually connect the dots. He moved to a cluttered desk, rifling through papers. Our unit wasn't the first to encounter the Eucharic, just the first to document it officially. There have been reports throughout history, special forces units, explorers, trappers who came back, changed. Victor settled into a worn armchair. Thomas, Elena says Nexus is hunting everyone from our old unit. Says Solomon's blood changed us all. Not just changed, Thomas corrected, finding what he sought in ancient leather journal. It marked us, protected us. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a scar identical to Victor's 3 parallel lines that had never fully healed. Solomon knew exactly what he was doing when he treated our injuries, Thomas continued. The blood transfusion was deliberate, a way to extend protection to those he deemed worthy. Elena stepped forward, removing her pendant. Then you recognize this? Thomas froze his expression, shifting from scientific detachment to reverence. Where did you get that? It was with the research materials I stole from Nexus. They found it at an archaeological dig near the original Eucharic village. Thomas reached out with trembling fingers, not touching the pendant, but tracing its shape in the air. The mark of the pack. Solomon wore one identical to it. He looked at Victor sharply. You have one too. I've seen it among your possessions. Victor nodded, pulling his own pendant from beneath his shirt. Solomon gave it to me before I left. Said it would recognize me as a friend of the Eucharic if I ever returned. Thomas moved to his research wall, pointing to a faded photograph, Solomon standing with several tribal elders, all wearing similar pendants. These weren't just jewelry. They're keys. Keys to what? Maya asked, speaking up for the first time since entering the cabin. To control, Thomas explained. The Eucharic believed the wolf spirit was too powerful to exist unchecked in human form. The pendants help maintain balance between human consciousness and wolf instinct. He looked pointedly at Elena, which explains why Nexus subjects are becoming increasingly unstable. They've triggered the transformation without understanding how to balance it. Elena processed this information, her scientific mind analyzing its implications. Reed is losing his humanity because he has no anchor. Precisely, Thomas confirmed. Solomon explained that without proper guidance, the wolf eventually consumes the human mind. It's why the Eucharic maintains such strict protocols around transformation, coming-of-age rituals, elder supervision, community support. Victor leaned forward. Thomas, how many from our unit are still alive? 4 counting us. Frank Reynolds in Idaho, David Chen in Oregon, and Martin Williams in Colorado. Thomas's expression darkened. Though Martin hasn't responded to my calls in months. We need to warn them, Victor insisted. Get them somewhere safe. Thomas laughed hollowly. No place is safe if Nexus has identified the genetic marker. They'll hunt everyone who carries it. Then we need to find the others who escaped from Nexus, Elena interjected. Form our own pack for protection. Thomas studied her thoughtfully. There's another option. He moved to a large wall map marked with dozens of red pins. For 50 years, I've tracked rumors, stories, unexplained phenomena that might indicate Ukarek presence. 3 years ago, I found something concrete. He indicated a remote area in the northern Rockies, a place they call Sanctuary, a hidden valley where the last pure-blooded Ukarek live isolated from the modern world. Maya approached the map, hope lighting her features. People who could help us control this. If they're willing, Thomas cautioned. They've hidden for good reason. The world has never been kind to those who are different. Victor examined the map critically. That's extremely remote territory. Difficult terrain, harsh conditions. Exactly why they chose it, Thomas replied. Few humans venture there, fewer still return. Lena studied the map, memorizing landmarks and terrain features. How certain are you this place exists? Certain enough to have spent the last 3 summers searching for it, Thomas answered. I found signs markers that match Solomon's descriptions, unusual tracks areas where electronics mysteriously fail. A sudden sharp sound outside halted their conversation. All 4 froze, senses alert. Thomas moved silently to a window, peering through a narrow gap in the blackout curtains. 3 vehicles approaching, he reported grimly. Military formation, not locals. Victor joined him, assessing the situation with the cool detachment of a combat veteran. Nexus, they must have followed our trail. Or they were already watching Thomas, Elena suggested. Thomas moved with surprising speed for his age, activating a series of switches that darkened the cabin completely. Emergency lights glowed faintly red, casting eerie shadows across his wall of research. I've prepared for this, he said, opening a concealed panel in the floor. Underground access to a mine shaft. Leads 2 miles north, exits near the river. He thrust a waterproof tube containing maps into Victor's hands. Everything I know about Sanctuary is in here. Coordinates, trail markers, Ukarek symbols to leave for safe passage. Victor gripped his old friend's arm. You're coming with us. Thomas shook his head, a strange calm settling over his features. Someone needs to slow them down, buy you time. He retrieved a metal case from beneath his bed, opening it to reveal blocks of what could only be explosives. Thomas, Victor began, but the older man cut him off. I'm dying anyway, Vic. Pancreatic cancer, 3 months at best. He managed a grim smile. Better to go out protecting the secret than wasting away in some hospital. Outside vehicles ground to a halt. Orders were shouted, boots crunched on snow. Go, Thomas urged, pressing a final item into Victor's hand, an ancient leather pouch. Solomon gave me this before we left Alaska. Said to open it only in the direst need. Perhaps that time has come. Elena tugged at Victor's arm. We need to move. Now. Victor hesitated, decades of friendship warring with tactical necessity. Finally, he clasped Thomas's shoulder. It was an honor serving with you. Likewise, brother. Thomas's eyes gleamed with purpose. Find Sanctuary. Finish what Solomon started. Victor shepherded Elena and Maya into the hidden passage. As the panel closed above them, Thomas's voice followed them into darkness. Remember what Solomon taught us. The strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. They moved swiftly through the narrow tunnel, guided by the beam of Victor's flashlight. Behind them, muffled by earth and stone, came the sound of splintering wood as Nexus forces breached the cabin. Will he really? Maya whispered, unable to complete the thought. Victor's expression remained stoic. Thomas Hayes never bluffed in his life. As if summoned by his words, a tremendous explosion rocked the tunnel, dust and debris showering down from the ceiling. The 3 pressed forward with renewed urgency, putting distance between themselves and whatever scene played out behind them. When they finally emerged near the river, the distant plume of black smoke rising from where Thomas's cabin had stood told the only story they needed to know. Victor allowed himself one moment of grief, head bowed for his fallen comrade. Then, with a discipline forged in war and tempered by decades in wilderness, he oriented himself using the sun and landmarks. North, he said, simply indicating their path. We find the others, then we find Sanctuary. Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort that acknowledged his loss without words. Maya looked between them, young and frightened, but drawing strength from their resolve. Together they moved into the wilderness, three disparate souls bound by blood more ancient than any of them fully understood. Behind them, the smoke from Thomas's last stand rose like a dark sentinel against the winter sky, a warning and a beacon, the first casualty in a war most of humanity didn't even know had begun. Days blended together as they traveled north through increasingly remote territory. Victor set a demanding pace despite his age, his knowledge of the wilderness proving invaluable as they avoided roads, settlements, in any place Nexus might monitor. They slept in abandoned hunting blinds, derelict firewatch towers, and once in a cave still bearing pictographs from peoples long vanished. On their fourth night, huddled around a small fire in a protected ravine, Victor finally opened the leather pouch Thomas had given him. Inside lay a yellowed piece of parchment covered in strange symbols and a small vial containing what appeared to be dried blood. Solomon's blood, Victor explained, carefully examining the vial. Thomas mentioned once that the Eucharic could track their own across vast distances using blood from the same lineage. Elena studied the parchment. These looked like instructions for a ritual of some kind. Thomas believed in being prepared, Victor said, returning the items to the pouch. This might help us locate other survivors. Maya watched them with a mixture of hope and skepticism. You really think we'll find others like us, that there's a place where people understand what's happening to me? Victor regarded her thoughtfully. The youngest of their group had struggled the most with controlling her emerging abilities. Twice during their journey, stress had triggered partial transformations, her eyes shifting to brilliant gold nails, extending to claws, her emotional state deteriorating toward feral panic. I've lived long enough to learn that nothing is impossible, Victor replied. The world is wider and stranger than most people ever discover. Using Thomas's maps, they altered course toward the last known location of a Nexus escapee, an area just south of the Canadian border, where unusual animal attacks had been reported in recent weeks. They found evidence of the escapee's passage 2 days later, a makeshift camp, hastily abandoned, blood spattering the snow nearby. Recent, Elena confirmed, examining the scene. Less than a day? Maya suddenly stiffened, her head tilting as she inhaled deeply. I can smell them. 2 people. 1 injured. Victor nodded, impressed. Lead the way. Maya moved with increasing confidence, following an invisible trail through dense forest. As twilight approached, she paused at the edge of a small clearing where a dilapidated Forest Service cabin stood. In there, she whispered. 1 like us, 1 human. Both afraid. Victor approached openly, hands visible. We're friends, he called. Former military, not Nexus. The cabin door cracked open, revealing a wary face, a man in his 30s clutching a hunting rifle. Prove it, he demanded. Elena stepped forward. I escaped from the Seattle facility. Like you, I have the same changes. Show me, the man insisted. Elena hesitated, then allowed her eyes to shift, the amber irises bleeding to luminous gold. The man studied her intently before finally nodding and opening the door wider. Inside, they found the man's companion, a young woman with a severe leg wound that showed signs of infection despite accelerated healing. Sarah, the man introduced her. My sister, they took us together, experimented on both of us. I manifested changes. She didn't, but they kept her as leverage to ensure my cooperation. Daniel, Victor acknowledged. Former Army Ranger. The man nodded, surprised. How did you know? Your bearing, the way you secured this position. Once military, always military. Daniel relaxed slightly. We escaped during transport 3 weeks ago. Been moving north ever since, but Nexus teams keep finding us. Sarah's wound is from our last encounter. Elena examined Sarah's leg, her medical training evident. The healing factor is fighting the infection, but she needs antibiotics. Victor rummaged in his pack, producing a small medical kit. Field medicine isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing. As Elena treated Sarah, Victor and Daniel conferred over Thomas's maps, discussing routes and sharing information about Nexus pursuit patterns. They're using tracking dogs, Daniel reported, but not normal dogs. These are bigger, faster, with an almost supernatural ability to follow trails. Early-stage wolf hybrids, Elena explained from across the room. Another Nexus experiment. Enhanced animals are easier to control than enhanced humans. Maya, who had remained near the door watching for threats, suddenly spoke. Can you control it? The change. Daniel's expression darkened. Partially, not when I'm angry or afraid. Then it just happens. Maya nodded in silent understanding. It's the same for all of us, Elena said gently. Without guidance, the instincts overwhelm the human mind during stress. Victor watched Maya's face, carefully recognizing the emotional struggle behind her question. I might be able to help with that. All eyes turned to him. When I served, I trained fresh recruits how to function under extreme stress, Victor explained. How to use fear as a tool rather than letting it paralyze you. How does that help with this? Daniel gestured to his own body. The principles are the same. Emotional control, breath regulation, mental discipline. Victor's voice took on the steady cadence of an experienced instructor. The wolf responds to fear and anger because those emotions trigger survival instincts. Master the emotions, master the response. Maya approached him hesitantly. Would you teach me? I'm tired of being afraid of myself. Victor nodded. We'll start tonight. Under a star-filled sky, Victor worked with Maya and Daniel, teaching techniques developed for soldiers facing combat but adapted for their unique situation. He guided them through breathing exercises, visualization methods, and mental frameworks for processing fear without surrendering to it. The key isn't eliminating fear, he explained, his voice steady and reassuring. It's acknowledging it, then channeling it productively. I taught young men how to face mortal danger in the harshest conditions imaginable. The secret isn't fearlessness, it's learning to use fear as motivation rather than letting it control your own. Elena watched from the cabin doorway, fascinated by the natural authority Victor projected despite his age. Here was a man who had spent decades being dismissed by younger generations, yet now imparting wisdom that might save their lives. They call us the forgotten generation, Victor told Maya, when she expressed amazement at his calm approach to their supernatural predicament. Those of us who grew up before the digital age, before the constant noise and distraction. But sometimes only those who have witnessed the world change can truly understand the value of what remains unchanged. By morning, both Maya and Daniel reported feeling more centered, more in control of their responses. Sarah's condition had improved as well, the antibiotics working alongside her partial healing abilities to fight the infection. As they prepared to continue their journey, Daniel raised the question they'd all been considering. This sanctuary you mentioned, do you really believe it exists? Thomas believed, Victor answered simply. That's good enough for me. And if we find it, Sarah asked, what then? Elena considered this question seriously. We learn to control what we've become. Then we stop Nexus from creating more like us without consent or understanding. You're talking about fighting a powerful corporation with government contracts, Daniel pointed out. With what army? Victor's weathered face creased into a rare smile. I believe we're in the process of assembling one. They departed as a group of 5 stronger together than apart. Maya moved with newfound confidence. Daniel watched over his sister with fierce protectiveness, and Elena consulted frequently with Victor on navigation and strategy. They were becoming something more than fellow fugitives. They were becoming a pack. Dawn painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold as the small group continued their northward trek. Victor led them through a labyrinth of narrow valleys and hidden passes, following Thomas's meticulously detailed maps. 6 days had passed since they'd found Daniel and Sarah, their group now moving with the synchronized efficiency of people who had learned to trust each other's strengths. Maya and Daniel had made remarkable progress under Victor's guidance. Their partial transformations, once triggered by fear or anger, now remained largely under conscious control. Sarah's wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint silver scar where infection had once threatened her life. Elena, with her medical background, had become the pack's healer, while Victor's wilderness experience kept them fed and hidden from Nexus search parties. On the 7th morning, disaster struck. They awoke to the distant thrum of helicopter rotors echoing through the mountains. Nexus, Daniel confirmed, his enhanced hearing, picking up details beyond the others. Multiple aircraft, search pattern. Victor studied the terrain ahead through binoculars. They've established a perimeter, blocking our route to Sanctuary. Elena joined him at the ridge overlook. How did they get ahead of us? Thomas's maps, Victor realized grimly. They must have recovered fragments from the explosion, figured out where we're headed. Sarah, who had been checking their supplies, approached with concern. What now? Victor considered their options with the careful deliberation of someone who had made life or death decisions in combat. We split up. Multiple targets are harder to track than one group. Bad idea, Daniel countered immediately. We're stronger together. Safer separated, Victor insisted. Elena and I will continue north, draw their attention. The rest of you circle east through Devil's Canyon, then north again when it's clear. Maya shook her head vehemently. No, the pack stays together. The word pack hung in the air between them, significant in ways none of them fully understood, yet all instinctively recognized. They had become more than allies of convenience. They were bound by shared experience, shared blood, and increasingly shared purpose. If we stay together, we all risk capture, Victor explained patiently. If we separate, some of us reach sanctuary regardless. Before the argument could continue, a new sound reached them, the distinctive whine of tracking dogs carried on the wind. Not ordinary dogs, but Nexus wolf hybrids, specifically engineered to hunt their kind. No more time, Victor declared. Final decision. We split up multiple routes, rendezvous at the waterfall marked on Thomas's map. 3 days. Reluctantly, the others nodded, recognizing the strategic necessity, if not the emotional cost. They divided supplies quickly, weapons, food, medical essentials distributed according to need. Victor handed the leather pouch containing Solomon's blood to Daniel. Keep this safe, he instructed. If you reach sanctuary before us, this might help explain who you are, why you've come. As they prepared to separate, Maya suddenly embraced Victor, the gesture catching the older man off guard. Stay alive, she whispered fiercely. You promised to teach me more. Victor's weathered face softened momentarily. I keep my promises, kid. And they departed in 3 directions, Victor and Elena heading directly north, toward the most heavily patrolled area, deliberately creating a diversion. Daniel and Sarah taking the Eastern Canyon route. Maya alone following a treacherous western path that only someone with enhanced abilities could safely navigate. Victor and Elena moved with purpose through increasingly difficult terrain. Twice they deliberately left signs for Nexus teams to follow broken branches, footprints in soft earth remnants of a hasty camp. Each time they changed direction afterward, leading pursuers away from the others' trails. By nightfall, they had reached a narrow ridge overlooking a steep valley. The sound of pursuit had grown more distant, their diversion partially successful. They made a cold camp, unwilling to risk firelight that might reveal their position. They'll have thermal imaging, Elena noted, huddled against the biting wind. Probably, Victor agreed, unpacking a thermal blanket that would mask their heat signatures. But they'll be looking for a group of 5, not 2. They settled beneath the blanket, conserving body heat in the frigid mountain night. After a long silence, Elena spoke again. Why did you really come with me? You could have stayed in Silverstone, lived out your days in peace. Victor gazed at the star-filled sky above them. Peace is overrated when it's just another word for irrelevance. After Sarah died, I was just existing, waiting for time to pass. His voice grew distant, reflective. When you showed up at my door wounded and hunted, it was the first time in years I felt truly necessary. A man your age should be enjoying retirement, not running from paramilitary forces through mountain wilderness, Elena pointed out. A rare smile touched Victor's lips. You sound like my son. He's probably worried sick about you. Jack stopped worrying about me a long time ago. Stopped understanding me even longer ago. Victor's expression grew serious again. But perhaps that's my failure, not his. I never could explain what happened in Alaska, how it changed me. How could I barely understood it myself. Elena studied him in the dim starlight. You're handling all this remarkably well. Most people would be terrified by what we can do. I've had 50 years to come to terms with the fact that the world is stranger than most people ever discover, Victor replied. Besides, fear is a luxury you can't afford in survival situations. You acknowledge it, use it to sharpen your senses, then set it aside to do what needs doing. Another lesson from war, one from life. Victor adjusted the thermal blanket. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be harder. Dawn revealed helicopter contrails crisscrossing the valley below, the search intensifying. Victor and Elena departed early, pushing higher into the mountains where aircraft would struggle to navigate the unpredictable wind patterns. The air grew thinner, each breath visible in the cold, but they maintained a steady pace. By midday, they reached a narrow pass that Thomas's map identified as Wolf's Throat, one of the few direct routes to the region where sanctuary supposedly lay. Victor studied the terrain ahead through binoculars, his experienced eye noting the subtle signs of recent activity. Nexus has been here, he confirmed. Recently. Elena scanned the area, her enhanced senses detecting details invisible to most humans. Ambush. Likely, this is an obvious choke point. They'd be fools not to watch it. Elena considered their options. We could wait for nightfall and risk the others arriving at the rendezvous with no backup. Victor shook his head. We push through. That's suicide if they're waiting. Victor studied Thomas's map again, tracing alternative routes with his finger. Not necessarily. Look here, old mining tunnels run beneath this entire ridge. Probably unstable after all these years, but they might offer a way past Nexus positions. How would we find the entrance? Victor pointed to a cluster of withered pine trees about half a mile east of their position. Tunnel operations needed timber. They typically established access points near stands like that. They circled carefully using natural cover to approach the area Victor had identified. Sure enough, partially concealed by decades of growth, they discovered a mine entrance secured with rusted iron bars. The barrier yielded to their combined strength, groaning in protest as decades-old welds snapped. The tunnel beyond stretched into darkness, supports sagging ominously in places, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten industry. Victor produced a small flashlight, its beam revealing narrow-gauge rail tracks disappearing into the mountain's heart. Tight fit, he observed, ducking to avoid a hanging timber, but it beats walking into an ambush. They proceeded cautiously, testing each step before committing their weight, aware that the mountain above them had been slowly reclaiming this human intrusion for perhaps a century. Twice they were forced to clear minor cave-ins, and once to detour around a flooded section where groundwater had breached the tunnel walls. After what seemed hours, Elena suddenly stopped. Listen. Victor extinguished his light immediately, both of them standing motionless in the perfect darkness. At first he heard nothing beyond the soft drip of water and their own breathing. Then it reached him, voices faint but distinct, somewhere ahead. Nexus, Elena whispered, her lips close to his ear. Victor shook his head, unsure. They crept forward in darkness, Elena leading now, her enhanced vision better suited to the absolute black. The voices grew marginally clearer, two people, perhaps three, speaking in low tones. Not English, Victor realized, but something that tugged at his memory from long ago. They rounded a bend and saw a faint light emanating from a side tunnel none of their maps had indicated. Victor gestured for Elena to wait as he inched forward to investigate. Peering around the rough-hewn corner, he froze in astonishment. Three figures huddled around a small lantern, their features immediately recognizable to Victor, despite the decades since he'd seen such faces. The high cheekbones, amber eyes, and silver-streaked black hair marked them unmistakably as Eucharic. One sensed his presence immediately, heads snapping up, eyes shifting to gold in an instant. The others followed suit, bodies tensing for either flight or fight. Victor stepped fully into view, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. I am a friend of Solomon, he said in English, hoping they would understand, from Alaska many years ago. The three exchanged glances, communicating silently in the way of those long accustomed to each other's thoughts. The oldest, a woman with striking silver hair and dignified bearing, approached cautiously. Show proof, she demanded, her English heavily accented, but clear. Victor slowly reached for the pendant around his neck, drawing it out for inspection. The wolf's head gleamed in the lantern light, ruby eyes catching the flame. The woman's expression changed instantly from suspicion to wonder. She reached out with weathered fingers, not touching the pendant, but tracing its shape in the air between them. Guardian, she breathed the word, carrying ritual significance. Solomon spoke of you, the soldier who earned trust. Relief flooded through Victor. We seek sanctuary. Others, like us, are being hunted by men who would use the Eucharic gift as a weapon. The woman studied him intently, then looked beyond to where Elena waited. She carries the change, but is not born to it. There are others, Victor explained quickly, humans changed against their will, seeking guidance, seeking safety. The woman conferred briefly with her companions in their native tongue before turning back to Victor. I am Nara, daughter of Elise, who was daughter of Solomon's sister. We are scouts watching the approaches for those who hunt our kind. Nexus, Elena said, stepping forward. They've established positions throughout these mountains. Nara nodded grimly. We have observed many weapons, many men with cold eyes. She gestured down the tunnel. Come, we lead you by hidden ways. Victor hesitated. We have companions, 3 others traveling different routes. A rendezvous planned. We know of them. One of the other Ukaric, spoke up a younger man with keen eyes. Our hunters watch, guide when possible. This revelation that they had been observed, perhaps even subtly assisted during their journey, surprised Victor. He exchanged a glance with Elena, who nodded slightly. They had little choice but to trust these people who represented their only hope of finding sanctuary. Nara extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Follow close. Speak little. Hunters have good ears. They moved through tunnels that twisted and branched in ways no mining operation would have designed, suggesting these passages had been modified by the Ukaric for their own purposes. Eventually, they emerged not onto the mountainside as Victor expected, but into a larger chamber hollowed from living rock. Nara relit the lantern, revealing ancient symbols carved into the walls, spirals, wolf heads, and geometric patterns that seemed to shift in the flickering light. At the chamber's center stood a stone altar, worn smooth by generations of hands. Rest here, she instructed. When moon rises, we continue. Safer in darkness. As they settled to wait, Victor noticed Elena examining the wall carvings with scientific curiosity. These symbols, she murmured, some match the markings on the pendants. Others appear in Nexus research documents. They were studying these but couldn't decipher their meaning. Language changes, Nara said, observing Elena's interest. Meanings remain. These tell story of first change when Spirit Wolf chose to share power with worthy humans. She pointed to a particular sequence. Warning also, power without wisdom destroys itself. Like what's happening to Reed, Elena noted, the transformation without guidance is consuming his humanity. Nara's expression darkened. This one you speak of, he leads the hunters, Victor nodded. Former security chief at Nexus, first to undergo their version of the change. Now more wolf than man. Dangerous, Nara said simply. Broken ones cannot return easily to balance. Elena glanced at Victor. You think Reed is beyond saving? Before he could answer, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels, the unmistakable report of gunfire followed by an inhuman howl that raised the hair on Victor's neck. The Ukaric were instantly alert, communicating in rapid bursts of their native tongue. Nara turned to Victor, her expression grave. Your companions are discovered. The hunters have them surrounded near the northern waterfall. Victor rose immediately. We need to help them. Too many hunters, the younger Ukaric cautioned. Guns, machines. They're my responsibility, Victor insisted. I won't abandon them. Nara studied him with newfound respect. The Guardian chooses duty over safety. Solomon chose well. She conferred again with her companions before continuing. We help, but understand if taken, sanctuary location must remain secret for all our people. Victor understood the implication immediately. If capture seemed imminent, death would be preferable to revealing what they knew. He nodded solemnly, accepting these terms. For 50 years, I've kept Solomon's secret, he said. I won't break faith now. Nara inclined her head in acknowledgement. Then we hunt the hunters. Together. They emerged from the tunnels at a different location, guided by the Ukaric through passages that seemed to defy normal geography. The night had fallen completely, but the full moon illuminated the snowfields with an ethereal glow that transformed the mountain landscape into a realm of silver and shadow. From their elevated position, they could see the confrontation unfolding at the waterfall rendezvous point below. Nexus forces had established a perimeter around a rocky outcropping where Daniel, Sarah, and Maya had taken shelter. Floodlights mounted on tactical vehicles cast harsh light across the scene, while armed personnel maintained a cautious distance from their quarry. Victor assessed the situation with a tactician's eye. 15, maybe 20 operatives, heavily armed. They're keeping their distance. They fear what your friends might become if cornered, Nara observed. Elena focused on a figure separated from the main Nexus force, a tall man pacing at the edge of the light, his movements displaying an unnatural fluidity. Reed, she confirmed. He's fully transformed. Victor studied the terrain, noting approaches cover and potential weak points in the Nexus position. We need a distraction, something to divide their attention while we extract our people. The younger Ukaric, who had introduced himself as Chiron, pointed to the eastern edge of the perimeter. Fuel tanks for their lights, vulnerable. Good eye, Victor acknowledged. Hit those and half their tactical advantage disappears. Nara nodded in approval. You have planned getting there, Victor replied, his mind working through scenarios and contingencies with the practiced efficiency of decades in wilderness and war. Elena and I approach from the west using the tree line for cover. Your people target the generators from the east. When the lights go out, we move in fast, get our people retreat to the tunnels. The hunters will follow, Kieran pointed out. Not if they're sufficiently discouraged, Victor said grimly. He removed his pack, extracting components he'd collected from Thomas's cabin items that, assembled correctly, would create effective improvised explosives. Nara watched with interest as his gnarled but sure fingers assembled the devices. You have done this before. Long time ago, Victor admitted. Different war. They divided the explosives between them, synchronized watches, and separated to approach the Nexus position from multiple angles. Victor and Elena moved through the forest with practiced stealth, using natural cover and the rhythm of the wind to mask their sounds. As they neared the perimeter, they could hear Reed's voice carried on the night air, a strange guttural sound that retained just enough humanity to form words. You cannot escape what you are becoming, he called to the trapped trio. Sanctuary is a myth. The only future for our kind is with Nexus, under control, under purpose. Maya's voice rang out in response, stronger and more confident than Victor had ever heard it. We've seen what your purpose looks like, Reed. We choose freedom. Reed's answering laugh held no humor, only predatory anticipation. Freedom to what? Become monsters without Nexus protocols. The wolf eventually consumes the human mind. You've delayed the inevitable, nothing more. From their hidden position, Victor and Elena could now see the standoff clearly. Daniel had positioned himself protectively before Sarah, while Maya stood slightly apart, her posture suggesting she was fighting to maintain control over her partial transformation. Reed paced before them, his form a disturbing hybrid of man and wolf. Elongated limbs, dense fur covering exposed skin, a face that had stretched into a muzzle while retaining human eyes filled with cold intelligence. Behind him, Nexus operatives maintained their positions, weapons trained on the outcropping. Victor checked his watch. 1 minute until the coordinated attack. He caught Elena's eye, nodding once. She understood when chaos erupted. Her primary objective was reaching Maya, whose control appeared most tenuous. The minute passed with excruciating slowness. Then, precisely on schedule, the eastern perimeter erupted in flame as the Eucharic's assault on the generator succeeded. Floodlights died in sequence, plunging half the area into darkness, broken only by moonlight and the spreading fire. Nexus forces reacted with professional efficiency, but confusion was inevitable. Victor seized the moment, triggering his first explosive at the opposite side of the perimeter. The resulting detonation sent personnel scrambling for cover, dividing their attention further. Now, Victor whispered, and they broke cover, sprinting toward their trapped companions. Reed sensed their approach immediately, his head snapping toward them with inhuman speed. Recognition dawned in his eyes as they locked on Victor. The old soldier, he snarled. I should have eliminated you at the beginning. Victor raised his hunting rifle. Not too late to treaty. Reed moved with blinding speed, but Victor had anticipated this, firing not at the transformed man, but at the ground before him. The round struck a small explosive he'd placed during their approach, the blast forcing Reed to leap backward. Elena used the distraction to reach Maya, Daniel, and Sarah. This way, she urged. Eucharic guides are waiting. They'll lead us to Sanctuary. Daniel supported Sarah, who appeared injured again, while Maya hesitated, looking back at Victor, still facing Reed alone. Go, Victor commanded without taking his eyes off his opponent. I'll be right behind you. Reluctantly, they retreated toward the eastern edge, where Nara and Kiran waited to guide them to safety. Victor maintained his position, becoming the focus of Reed's rage and Nexus's attention, buying precious seconds for the others to escape. Reed circled slowly, recognizing the tactical maneuver. Noble sacrifice, old man, pointless. We have their scent now. There's nowhere they can hide. That's where you're wrong, Victor replied calmly. You've lost your humanity, Reed. That makes you strong, but it also makes you blind to certain truths. What truths? Reed mocked, continuing his predatory circling. That strength without wisdom destroys itself. That the wolf without the pack is already defeated. Victor maintained eye contact, an act of dominance that clearly unsettled Reed despite his physical advantage. Solomon understood this. The Eucharic have always understood this. Reed snarled, patience exhausted. Solomon is dead. His people are myths, and you are nothing but a relic who should have died decades ago. He launched himself at Victor with supernatural speed claws extended for a killing blow. Victor stood his ground until the last possible moment, then triggered his final explosive, not a destructive charge, but a magnesium flare that erupted with blinding intensity. Reed howled in agony, his enhanced eyes overwhelmed by the sudden brilliance. Victor used the momentary advantage to retreat, moving swiftly toward the extraction point where Elena waited despite his earlier order to leave. "Stubborn woman," he muttered as she helped him toward the tunnel entrance. "Learn from the best," she countered, supporting his weight as they disappeared into the stone passage, moments before Nexus forces could reorganize their pursuit. They moved deeper into the mountain's heart, following Nara through twisting tunnels that seemed to shift and change direction unpredictably. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a vast underground chamber where the rest of their group waited anxiously. Maya rushed forward, embracing Victor fiercely. "Thought you weren't going to make it, old man." "Had to make an impression," Victor replied, dryly, wincing slightly as her enthusiasm aggravated injuries sustained during the confrontation. Daniel approached his expression a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Nexus will regroup. They won't give up easily." "They'll find only stone and silence," Nara assured them. "These passages change for those who do not know their secrets." As if to emphasize her point, a distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, a controlled cave-in triggered by the remaining Ukaric scouts sealing the most direct routes behind them. Sarah, her leg bandaged again, spoke up. "So, Sanctuary really exists." Nara's weathered face broke into a smile for the first time. "See for yourself." She led them to the chamber's far end, where a narrow fissure admitted the faintest suggestion of dawn light. One by one they squeezed through the opening, emerging onto a ledge overlooking a sheltered valley, hidden between towering mountain peaks. Below them spread Sanctuary, a community of stone and timber dwellings nestled against the valley walls, protected from harsh mountain weather by the natural bowl formation. Streams fed by snowmelt converged in a central lake, while terraced gardens climbed the lower slopes. Smoke rose from morning cookfires, and figures moved about their daily tasks in the early light. "Home of the Ukaric for 15 generations," Nara explained proudly, "hidden from those who would destroy what they cannot understand." Victor stood transfixed, the sight before him, fulfilling a promise made 50 years ago when Solomon had pressed the wolf pendant into his hand. "It's real," he murmured. "All this time I wondered." "Solomon knew you would come when the time was right," Nara said, "when others needed the Guardian's protection." As they descended the winding path toward the village, curious onlookers emerged from dwellings. Children with amber eyes stared in wonder at the newcomers, while elders watched with more measured assessment. At the valley's center, before what appeared to be a communal meeting house, stood an elderly woman whose bearing commanded immediate respect. "Isabella," Nara explained quietly, "daughter of Solomon, elder alpha of the Ukaric." Isabella approached with dignified grace despite her advanced years. Like her father before her, she wore the wolf pendant that marked her status among her people. Her gaze moved over each of them in turn, lingering longest on Victor. "The Guardian returns," she said, her voice strong despite her age, "after many seasons as my father foresaw." Victor inclined his head respectfully. "Solomon saved my life. I've come to repay that debt by helping these people." He gestured to Elena, Maya, Daniel, and Sarah. "They carry the Ukaric blood, but without guidance, without understanding." Isabella studied the transformed humans with keen interest. Forced change, unnatural awakening. Her expression softened with compassion. Yet the blood speaks true in them. She turned to address the gathered villagers in their native tongue. Though Victor couldn't understand the words, the reaction was immediate. Homes were opened, healers summoned, food prepared. The hospitality extended without reservation to these strangers who carried their blood. "You will rest," Isabella told them. "Heal, then we will speak of what comes next." The following days passed in a blur of new experiences. Sarah's injuries received proper treatment from Ukaric healers whose methods combined ancient knowledge with a surprising understanding of modern medicine. Maya, Daniel, and Elena began instruction in controlling their transformations under the guidance of experienced mentors. Victor found himself welcomed among the elders, his lifetime of wilderness experience respected, and his connection to Solomon honored. On the third evening, Isabella summoned Victor to her dwelling, a simple structure distinguished only by the ancient symbols carved into its supporting timbers. Inside the walls displayed artifacts and images chronicling the Eucharic history, including, to Victor's surprise, a faded photograph of Solomon standing beside a much younger version of himself in Alaska. "My father spoke often of you," Isabella said, offering him a seat near the central fire. "The soldier who showed kindness when others brought only fear." Victor settled himself carefully, his joints stiff from the mountain's cold. "Solomon saved more than my life. He showed me a different way of seeing the world." Isabella nodded in understanding. "The blood he shared did more than heal your body. It created a bond, what we call the Guardian's Path. Not fully Eucharic yet, more than simply human." "I never fully understood what happened," Victor admitted. "Only that I changed afterward. Subtle things, sharper senses, quicker healing, a connection to the natural world I couldn't explain. My father saw something in you, a spirit aligned with our own, despite your different origins." Isabella poured a steaming liquid from an earthenware pot, offering him a cup. "He believed humans and Eucharic were not meant to be separate peoples, but partners in protecting the balance of the world." Victor accepted the drink, its herbal aroma reminding him of remedies Solomon had prepared decades ago. "Then why remain hidden all these years?" Isabella's expression grew somber. "Fear, misunderstanding. Throughout history, when our kind revealed themselves, humans responded with violence, called us monsters, demons, abominations." She gestured to the historical artifacts surrounding them. "We tried living openly 7 generations ago. The result was near extinction. Yet you took me in, trusted me with your secret. Because you earned that trust," Isabella replied simply, "and these others may earn it in time." Victor sipped the offered drink, finding it oddly invigorating despite its bitter taste. "Nexus won't stop hunting, Reed especially. He's become something dangerous, neither fully wolf nor fully man." "The broken ones?" Isabella nodded gravely. "Those whose change occurs without spiritual preparation. The body transforms, but the spirit remains divided, creating conflict that eventually destroys the mind." She studied Victor thoughtfully. "You encountered this Reed directly. What did you sense in him?" Victor considered the question carefully. "Rage, hunger, but also fear, as if some part of him recognizes what he's losing but can't stop the process." "There may yet be hope for him," Isabella mused, "if he can be reached before the division is complete." "You think he can be saved?" "All can be saved if they choose salvation," Isabella replied. "But first we must secure our own people. Your companions learn quickly, but they are not yet ready to face what pursues them." "What do you suggest?" Victor asked, recognizing the wisdom in her assessment. Isabella rose, moving to a carved wooden chest in the corner of her dwelling. From it, she withdrew a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten pages and intricate diagrams. "Solomon's teachings," she explained, placing it in Victor's hands. "The complete method for achieving balance between human consciousness and wolf instinct. What Nexus discovered is only a fragment of true understanding." Victor accepted the journal reverently. "This could help others like Elena and Maya." "It could help all who carry the blood," Isabella confirmed, "including those Nexus has already changed." She fixed him with a penetrating gaze. "Victor Morgan, will you accept the full responsibility of the Guardian, not merely to protect our secret, but to guide those caught between worlds?" The weight of her question settled over him. At 76, most men contemplated quiet retirement, not embarking on new missions of profound importance. Yet as he considered the alternatives, returning to his empty cabin, awaiting the slow approach of death, leaving Elena and the others to struggle alone with their transformations, the choice became clear. "I will," he said simply. Isabella nodded, satisfaction evident in her amber eyes. "Then there is one final step in your journey." She indicated a small wooden cup filled with a dark liquid that had not been on the table moments before. "Solomon's blood preserved through our ways. The final gift he prepared for you, should you ever find your way to us." Victor stared at the cup, understanding dawning. "This will complete the change that began 50 years ago." "Not to become Eucharic," Isabella clarified, "but to become fully Guardian, the bridge between our peoples. You will retain your humanity while gaining the wisdom to guide others through their transformations. Victor reached for the cup without hesitation. After a lifetime of searching for purpose, of feeling increasingly irrelevant in a changing world, he had finally found his true calling. He raised the cup to his lips and drank. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Heat spread through his body like wildfire, memories cascading through his mind, not just his own, but Solomon's as well. Generations of knowledge of struggle and survival poured into him. His senses sharpened beyond anything he'd experienced before, the world suddenly rich with information previously hidden. When the initial shock subsided, Victor found himself changed. Not physically transformed like Reed or the others, but fundamentally altered nonetheless. He could sense the connections between all those who carried the blood, Maya and Elena in their training lodges, Daniel and Sarah resting nearby the Eucharic throughout the village, and most surprisingly distant sparks representing others scattered across the continent, those who carried the heritage without knowing its source. You feel them, Isabella observed. The pack bonds. All of them, Victor confirmed in wonder. Even those I've never met. This is the Guardian's gift, to sense, to understand, to guide. Isabella smiled gently. My father chose wisely. In that moment, Victor Morgan understood that his life had not been moving toward an ending, but a beginning. At 76, when most believed his useful years behind him, he had found his greatest purpose. Not despite his age, but because of it, his lifetime of experience, now enhanced by abilities that would allow him to protect and guide a new generation caught between two worlds. What happens now? He asked, already sensing the answer. Now it's fine, Isabella replied. We prepare for what comes next. Nexus will not abandon their search. Reed will not rest until he finds us. Others like your companions exist across the country, confused and afraid, needing guidance. She gestured toward the valley beyond her dwelling. Sanctuary has remained hidden for generations, but perhaps the time for hiding is passing. Victor nodded, understanding the implications. A new chapter begins. For all of us, Isabella agreed. The question is whether humans and Eucharic write it together or continue their ancient conflict. Victor thought of his son Jack, of the modern world with its technology and progress, and of the ancient wisdom contained in this hidden valley. Two realities that needed to find common ground before either destroyed the other. Together, he said with quiet certainty, that's the only way forward. As dawn broke over Sanctuary the following morning, Victor Morgan stood on a high ledge overlooking the valley, feeling the weight of his new responsibility. Below, Elena worked with Eucharic healers, combining her medical knowledge with their ancient techniques. Maya trained with young Eucharic hunters, her movements growing more confident as she embraced her new abilities. Daniel and Sarah had found purpose, helping with the community's daily needs. They were becoming a true pack, not through force or fear, as Reed had attempted, but through mutual respect and shared purpose. Victor touched the wolf pendant at his throat, feeling the connection it represented across decades and generations. At an age when the world had deemed him obsolete, he had discovered his most important role, not as a relic of the past, but as a bridge to the future. I thought my life had ended when I lost Sarah, he murmured to the mountains, that at my age there was nothing left to expect. But life isn't measured in years, but in moments, and sometimes the most extraordinary moments come when you least expect them. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lone voice soon joined by another in harmonious counterpoint. Different voices, different strengths, but together creating something neither could achieve alone. Victor smiled, recognizing the perfect metaphor for the path ahead. The Guardian's work was just beginning.